Yes, I do support charter schools, but what I've always supported are great schools. What I've always understood is that people ought to have choices, that no matter what zip code you live in, you ought to have a shot at a better life. Over the last year, I've noticed that California's political leaders have been focused on Washington, D.C. There's a lot of talk about who the president is firing, or what the president is tweeting, or even who the president is firing via a tweet. And I've tried to keep that in mind. At the end of the day, what we do is far more important than what we say. And I think this weekend is a good reminder of that. Across the country, millions of people took to the streets to join the March for Our Lives. Since the president took office, there's been no shortage of marches and protests by people sharing the displeasure with policies of this administration. But this weekend was different. It was a new energy, a new momentum towards change. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was young people who were responsible for organizing this weekend and who've been the driving force behind this debate. Yesterday in my own debate, I talked about my grandson, 12-year-old Andres, who asked my daughter a couple of weeks ago, can he walk out of school like his grandpa did 50 years ago? Can he walk out for the notion that kids have a right to demand from their parents and their families to take responsibility for mass killings across our country? And I couldn't be prouder that he was one of those kids. It's devastating to imagine what the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School have gone through in the last month and a half. And yet I think we're all inspired by these students and their peers around the country and what they've been able to accomplish. Truly seeing the next generation of leaders rise up before our eyes. And it's a reminder of why it's so important that we have an education system that works for everyone. We're here today because the California we grew up in was more than a dream. It was a real place where people could work hard, make it into the middle class, and stay there. I'm running for governor because we need to make that dream possible again. And we know what the pathway is. It's an education. Some of you know my story. I was a high school dropout. Got kicked out of school before that. I went from a Catholic school that gave me a foundation, college prep education, got kicked out, led the walkouts, also messed up a bit. Went to a public school, Roosevelt High School, where they put me in basic reading classes, basic math classes, where the counselor said to me, I think you look like a guy that likes to have fun. So we're going to put you in classes that don't challenge you much. Yeah, that was 1969. I ended up dropping out a couple of months later. I left school, and luckily I had a great teacher and a great mom who emphasized education. And I went back. I went 4 nights a week at night school and graduated on time. I went to East LA College for a year after that. And then I went to UCLA on an affirmative action program. I've often said that it was a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act that gave me the shot. It was an affirmative action program that gave me an opportunity to go to UCLA. And some people will say I came in through the back door. But one thing's for sure, I got out the front. And what I understood, and what I've understood from those days, is that to whom much is given, much is expected. I have a responsibility to stand up. We may not all have the same opportunities, but we all want the same things: a good paying job, a safe neighborhood to raise our kids, a home we can afford, access to affordable health care, and dignity and respect. And now more than ever, we know that education is the ladder that can help us reach those goals. It's allowed us, every one of us here today, to be in a position to lift those around us. I loved your smile as you were working with those kids. I loved the tears in your eyes, the passion that you have for those kids. That's why we're here today. I know what an education can do. It transformed my life. When I became mayor, 1 out of 3 schools were failing. Everybody talked about that I was the first American of Mexican descent in 133 years to be the mayor of Los Angeles. And as everyone celebrated that, I saw that everybody serving me looked just like me. I had a school district, the second largest in the United States of America. 1 out of 3 kids, 1 out of 3 schools were failing. A 44% graduation rate. 34 years after I had graduated from Roosevelt High School, 1971, a 25% graduation rate. In 2005, a 36% graduation rate. I said to my city, the second largest city in this country, the largest city by far, by a factor of 5 in this state, I said, this city won't survive, much less thrive, with a 44% graduation rate. I had worked for the teachers union for 8 years. I was their chief steward in Sacramento. I stood up for teachers. I was married to one, and I understood how hard you work, whether you work in a charter school or a traditional public school. I know what a tough job that is. But I said, we can't keep on making excuses. When people tell me, well, you don't understand, Mr. Mayor, these kids are poor. They're English language learners. Their parents didn't go to college. And I look at them and I say, who are you talking about me? I was poor. My parents didn't go to college. Our kids can learn. We got to set high standards. When I dropped out of school, I remember my mother coming in one day. I'd put on another tattoo. I'd been in a fight the night before. I was full of blood. Not mine, but she was concerned. And she said to me, what's that? Bandage on my right arm. And I said, it's another tattoo. And she started to cry. And she said, you don't believe in you, but I believe in you. You're destined for greatness, and you don't even know it. And she walked out of the room, sobbing and crying. I kind of smirked it and laughed it off. I didn't remember it, but I've never forgotten it. And that's why when I walk into my schools, and by the way, I said we had a 44% graduation rate. My schools had a 36% graduation rate. I took the schools of Watts, Boyle Heights, and downtown, the lowest performance schools in Los Angeles. I said, give me those schools. Traditional public schools with a big, thick union contract, just like that. No flexibility. I said, give me those schools. And every time I walk into those schools, I say to those kids the same thing my mother said to me. I said, do you believe in you? I believe in you. You are destined for greatness. You are working in these schools because you understand. We got to give these kids a shot. We got to give them an opportunity. We got to stand up for the notion that every kid can learn. We got to tell them you can reach for the stars and follow your dreams. You can go anywhere, be anyone. But you got to believe in you. I believe in you. You got to be able to work hard. You got to do it. We understand that. That's why I'm for charters, I'm for good schools, great schools, whether they're charter or traditional. But we're living at a time, and this is an existential time for you. We're living at a time when you can't challenge this broken status quo. If somehow you're anti-union because you stand up and say, hey, I want to put kids first. I believe in unions. I believe in unions. I think parents ought to have one. I'm going to take you back, everyone. Why did this organization get behind this candidacy? Not just because I might be the first, because I've stood up with you for 8 years. I stood up for your kids. I stood up for your parents. The parent union started in Los Angeles when I said just what I said to you right now. I'm for unions. I think everyone ought to have one. Let's have a parent union. The Adelanto, the trigger bill, that happened with us. We bought the parent trigger to Sacramento. Why? We said if schools have been failing kids for generations, we ought to stand up. We ought to be able to say no to failure, no to the lack of high standards. We took that parent trigger. You know, I said 1 out of 3 schools were failing. After 8 years, it was 1 out of 10 schools were failing. That 44% graduation rate went to 72%. It's now at 77%. My schools, which started at 36%, are now 81%. My high school's at 81%. But we broke down that high school. So guess what? We got a magnet there, 99.6% graduation rate. We broke that school down because it was the largest school west of the Mississippi. We started a new school, a STEM school. It's called Mendez, named after the civil rights lawsuit that was the predicate for Brown versus education. Mendez has a 94% graduation rate. Our kids can learn. Our kids can thrive. Our kids can strive to the moon if we believe in them. And that's why we're here today. It's not just about charters. It's about good schools, great schools. It's about parent choice. It's about the notion that every kid deserves a right. We're living at a time in California, the 6th largest economy in the world, an economy the size of France, with the highest effective poverty rate in the United States of America, an economy rate comparable to Romania. Yes. 20 people died just down the road in communities all around here. 20 people died of hepatitis A, homeless. California has half the homeless in the United States of America. Half the homeless. LA has a quarter of the homeless. We could do something about that. It starts with an education. You know, when people talk about the prison pipeline, why are you teaching these kids? Because you believe that we have to redirect the prison pipeline to a pipeline of hope and opportunity. That comes with a dream. That comes with education. I'm here today acknowledging that you've endorsed my candidacy. But more importantly, I'm here today to ask you to get involved. You know, yesterday we were at a debate. Front runner didn't show up. He's ahead. Sometimes, and I tell people, whether I was ahead or behind, I always show up. I think it's important to show up. I've been to every single debate. I've been to every single debate, the only candidate of the 7 of us that have been to every single debate. Why? I think the least I could do is show the respect to you that I understand this election is important. It's an important election because our country is in a perilous time. I started talking a few minutes ago about what's going on in Washington. I think California wants to set a different path. You don't talk and tweet to lead the resistance. That sounds good. I'm going to tweet today. Donald Trump. We're leading the resistance. You want to lead the resistance? Let's address the highest effective poverty rate in the United States of America. You want to lead the resistance? Let's stand up for the notion that we're tired of being at the bottom, not just in per pupil spending, and we're going to change that. We're going to change that. But we're also at the bottom in success. English and math, virtually across the board, and particularly if you're of color. You know, we have an 80% graduation rate. You don't have to keep on moving that. I stopped reading that a long time ago. I'm fine. Thank you very much. And sorry to you, all of you who wrote that beautiful speech, but I wanted to be real today. I wanted to be real. Because you know what? When you were crying, I felt that passion. I know why you're crying. These are our kids. These are our kids. And we're going to stand up for them. And we're going to fight for them. And you said this is a big tent, Margaret, and you're so right. Because real progressives got to stand up for the notion we can't leave so many people behind. Real progressives got to say, if I'm going to lead the resistance, I want to address the highest effective poverty rate in the United States of America. Real progressives are going to stand up for kids, even if they don't have a voice or a union, even if they're not powerful, even if they can't contribute to your election or even vote for you. We're going to stand up for you and fight for you. And I've been doing that my whole life. I'm here today because I want to inspire you and thank you. I want you to understand we are in an existential battle, not just for the survival of charter schools, but for whether or not we're going to stand for the proposition that our public school system, because you are public schools, and we're going to fight and push back against that notion. You are public schools. You're public schools that are innovating. You're public schools that are willing to go into the toughest neighborhoods and turn things around. You're public schools that oftentimes work at a disadvantage because you needed a bill to say, if there's an empty school building, you ought to have a right to have access to that building. That's not a radical notion. But we're in a battle to define what's a progressive. What kind of state do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a state where there's so many homeless people, where so many people end up in prison, where they end up working in jobs where minimum wage jobs where they can't not just buy a home, but rent one or maintain a family? I think we want more than that. And it starts with an education, and it starts with you. So I wanted to come to thank you. Not just thank you for your endorsement and your support, but thank you for the work that you do every single day. I know how hard it is. I tell people, you know, my son went to Princeton. One of my sons went to Princeton. The other one went to USC and FIT. And, you know, mom was a educator and had a master's, and father was the most powerful man in the town. They didn't need a great teacher in quite the way I did. Grew up in a home of domestic violence and alcoholism. Father left when I was 5. Grew up in poverty. These kids need you. And so today I come to thank you. But I come to ask you to get involved. We need to organize and mobilize our parents. That's why we got that parent union together. We need to get them to knock on doors and call people and say, this election matters. Because this state matters. And our children's futures matter. That's why we're here today, and that's why you do what you do every single day. So I want to thank you. And I want to say this. My whole life, I wasn't born on third base and think I hit a home run. My whole life has been a life of struggle. My whole life has been a life of overcoming the odds, of showing up and standing up. And I'm going to show up and stand up for you. But more importantly, I'm going to show up and stand up for our kids. I'm going to take on, and by the way, I'm pro-union. I was a union organizer for 15 years. I was president of a union. I worked for the teachers union. They spent $1.8 million to get me elected to the mayor. They had never spent a quarter before me. They got me elected because they wanted me to be governor one day. And then I woke up and said, I got to fight for these kids. I want your support, but I'm going to stand with these kids. And I'm going to do that as governor. I'll take on powerful interests, even if they're powerful interests who I'd like to be friends with, who I'd like to collaborate with, who I want to work with. But we're going to work on the terms that put the rights of kids first. We're going to work on the terms that say every child has a right to a great education. We're going to work on the terms that say we're going to fund our schools, we're going to pay our teachers, we're going to train them, but we're going to ask more of all of us, of parents, of teachers, of politicians. We're going to stand up. We're going to work together. But if we have to, we're going to fight. Fight for the rights of kids. Fight for a great and generous America that's always had as its backbone a public education system. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. You'll see me on the campaign trail. I'll be in your schools. I'll be in your towns. I'll be knocking on every single door that I can, possibly can. But at the end of the day, we will win. And we'll win because we're standing up for what's right. We're standing up for a great and generous America that acknowledges that every one of our children have a right to a great education and a better life. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you all.